For me, it's about kind of ensuring the community always has a voice, and we are always living that mantra, nothing about us without us, by
Mm,
constantly reminding people
mhm.
that we are here and that we should have a say, the first say and the co-productive say in what happens about us, and to us all the time. Hi, everyone. Welcome again to another episode of the Equality Edit, where we unpack quality one story at a time. Thank you so much for joining. Today, I am joined by my friend and colleague, Daniele Lul. So I met Daniele in, was it like 2020 or 21?
I think so. Yeah, around that time. Yeah.
When when he and his co-founder, which he will explain, co-founder of what in a minute, reached out to me to deliver a disability inclusion talk for, I think it was it LGBTQ
It
consortium,
was.
or
Yeah. Yeah. Good
I was
memory.
going to say or something, but not or something at all. And it was a really good talk. And as a result, then invited me to apply to be a trustee for his charity, which Daniele will explain in a minute. So we have a long history. We also bonded over music, rock music. And I'm sure there's lots of other things we bonded over as well, alcohol and cocktails, which has also been like a big part of our relationship. But I will hand over to Daniele to let him introduce himself. Yes, let's get on with the episode. So, hi, Daniele. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Esi. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this project. And yes, I'm Daniele Lul. My pronouns are he, him, and I am the co-founder and community engagement director of ParaPride. ParaPride is a non-profit organization. We are an empowerment charity. We advocate for the disability education and awareness of disabled LGBTQ plus people.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And can you tell us a little bit more? I mean, I want to talk about why you started ParaPride in the first place, but can you tell us a little bit more about why it's so important to advocate and empower those two communities in the work?
Yeah, well, the need for an organization like ParaPride, for me personally, comes from my experience of becoming disabled later on in life. So I have an acquired disability. I became disabled at the age of 40, so about 10 years ago. And so, for context, I'm an amputee. I walk on prosthetic legs, and the reason why I become an amputee is because I had the meningitis and septicemia, which was a very difficult and sudden thing and very unexpected. And so that had a really big impact in my life, and it had an impact on the choice of founding an organization like ParaPride. Becoming disabled taught me how much disabled people are excluded from many aspects of society and how very quickly that can happen. And so, personally, as a gay man, I could see that there was a very evident need to address the lack of inclusion for disabled people within the LGBTQ plus community. So, I wanted to do something about that. And I came across a small group of people who were very like-minded, who were part of the disabled community, who also identified as LGBTQ plus. So we kind of did, we kind of like got together and decided to, to found ParaPride. And originally we weren't really sure how to call it. Should we call it the Disability LGBT Pride? Should we call it this, that, the other? And I always really loved, you know the word power pride, because I really loved, I really liked to see, to watch things, the Paralympic Games or the Parathletic Games, because that was a very, that was an aspect about disability that everyone looked at in awe, like, and for once, once every however many years, however much often, the Paralympic comes, every few years, that there's that one instance where everyone is like, oh, disability is like really good and really, and of course disability is not all about that. There are many different aspects of disability. And there's a one thing that I always notice since becoming disabled is the misrepresentation of disability and the different conceptions of disability. So on the one hand, generally I could see that people view disability not in a very positive way. It's either the burden of society or like the people, the community in need of special care, that they need of special assistance. And then on the very opposite end, there's the superhero, the Paralympic champion, and in between these two far extremes, there's very little that people recognize. And in actual fact, there is a lot. There's us everyday people that don't only want to be seen as disabled. We have so much more going on in our lives. We work, we go out, we go shopping, whatever it is, but we don't only want to be seen as a disabled. We are very talented, we are empowered, we are so much more to our disability. So that was one thing. And I'm going a little bit around this, but what I liked about the word ParaPride is because it felt a bit like more empowering, and it comes from the the parallel of the regular LGBTQ plus pride, but it still has the pride there.
For me, it's about kind of ensuring the community always has a voice, and we are always living that mantra, nothing about us without us, by constantly reminding people that we are here and that we should have a say, the first say and the co-productive say in what happens about us, and to us all the time. For me, it's about kind of ensuring the community always has a voice, and we are always living that mantra, nothing about us without us, by constantly reminding people that we are here and that we should have a say, the first say and the co-productive say in what happens about us, and to us all the time.
It kind of like it kind of like it's what it says on the tin, and I really like that about PowerPoint. And that is in essence how PowerPoint came about. My experience in wanting to do this definitely played a big role. And also, like I said, I could see that there was definitely a need, to raise awareness about our community, our intersectional community. And that's how we came about. And, we launched in 2019. So we're still a fairly young organization. We are growing charity. We are growing community. We're very busy, even though we're a small team. But uh, and ParaPride is a community led organization, is volunteer led, and our lived experiences are at the core of what we do.
Brilliant. There's so much I want to touch upon, but I just want to kind of raise awareness of the tagline of ParaPride, because I also think that the name ParaPride is really, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of not just catchy, but really, it really says what it does, and it really uplifts the community. And I think the tagline really helps with that, pride in everyone.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It used to be Pride in Everyone, and we recently changed it to Pride in Everybody.
Oh my
So,
gosh,
yeah.
sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's a fairly recent thing that we changed. And, when you were involved in Power Pride as a trustee, it didn't quite, it was still like in everyone. So it's perfectly fine. It's just a small change that we think that it just apart from sounding better, it serves the purpose more.
So is that about is that the literal translation of body? So every body and how a body works?
Yes, yeah. Well, part of what we do, we want to create more body positivity. Like we want to raise awareness about body positivity and being able to
Perfect.
celebrate that and being able to own that. So definitely pride in everybody as a slogan it definitely aligned more with what we do.
Yeah. Brilliant. I love it. I really like it. I think it really, from a it's not that the most important thing is the marketing, but from a marketing perspective as well, it really kind of sums up exactly what ParaPride is from the name and the tagline. I really like it. So you mentioned at the end there, I mean, there's lots of things that I wanted to touch on actually that you were talking about. So one of the things that you talked about when you were explaining why ParaPride exists is that when you acquire a disability, the marginalization is so fast. And that's something I've never experienced because haven't acquired my disability. I've always had a disability. And so for me, it's a bit different. For me, it's almost like something I expect, which is not a great thing, but I expect a lack of inclusion and I expect a lack of access. But that jolt to kind of be from being in maybe a community that was embracing to one that marginalizes you must have been quite a shock.
It was, and like you realize once you become disabled, once you live life as a disabled person, you realize how how suddenly it can happen, something that you never really thought that you would be a part of, or something that you would never think that would happen to you. It can happen very easily, and
Mm,
disability is one of the largest marginalized groups in the whole world, and it can happen at any point in your life, whether it's just naturally growing old or something like yeah, traumatic, like what happened to me happens. And so you can't, you need to react to that.
mm,
You need to make the most of it. I think with my experience, because I was poorly for a very long time. I was in hospital for months and months, and I know how close I was to not being here at all. You kind of really
mm,
need to look at the bigger picture. Okay, yes, I will be living life as a disabled person. I will need to adapt to walking differently. I need to walk on prosthetic legs, and but in the grand scheme, in the very broader picture, at least I have a life. I have a survival. I can still live life, and adapt to things differently. Like I'm lucky enough for this sort of stuff to happen in a day and age where there's a lot more information in a city, in a large city like London, where there are more resources and more information and more, yeah, more things that will impact your life, in a more positive way. And it also happened to me at an age where I could adapt more easily than something like this. In my journey, I met a lot of people who were elderly, in their 70s or even 80s, and the limb loss at that age is very different, because you adapt
yeah.
things differently, and your attitude is kind of like slightly different. But I was in the bad. The good is that it happened to me at an age where I could adapt to things more better, just better. And also, it's worth being reminded that we're all very different. Experiences from person to person change, regardless of your age, regardless of, whatever is going on in your life. Like I was lucky enough for to have the right support in my life, from my family to my friends, and also to the professional people that I was in contact with, doctors and nurses and specialists. And I was given right advice, and I was given the right, the right information. These are the resources that you can use. You can live life. It's okay. You can do whatever you want. And I think that's really important to have, because if I didn't have that, I didn't know what to do. But I have to say that what really helped me also through my journey, accepting my disability and my new life, is something that happened to me in my life many years before I become disabled. So because I'm Italian, I grew up in Italy. I'm mixed race, but like my growing up happened in the north of Italy in a city called Modena. And, back then, it's slightly different now, but back then, when you reach the age of 18, there's a mandatory year that you have to do to military service, is what it used to call it. It doesn't happen anymore, but back then you had to, you reach 18, and unless you're like, in university, stuff like that, you have to just drop everything you're doing and dedicate your 1 year of your life to military service. But there was one, if there was only one way to opt out of that, and that is, to declare that you are against arms and against weapons and all that stuff. And then the other option was to do 1 year as a, well, it used to be called civil service, so you'd go, in my for what happened to me, they send me to work as an admin for a local authority, and they allocated me to an organization, a charity, which was supporting parents with children who were disabled. And
Okay.
for 1 year, I worked with them. And this was a very big insight. From the very beginning, I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? Who am I going to come across? What kind of disabled people am I going to be supporting? How am I going to help them? I was just an 18-year-old kid, or
Yeah.
18 or 19, I can't remember. And, so I started working very closely with the president, with the director of this
The president.
organization, who was a disabled man, and he was dedicating his life to to helping others, growing, yeah, raising their children who were disabled. And I absolutely loved it, and that was so
Mm,
eye-opening for me, because it taught me so much about disability. I was able to look at disability in a very different way, because well, like everything, when you don't know about it, you just have your own preconceptions and your own kind of like, yeah, you don't know how to react. You're ignorant about that. But then you meet
yeah.
people who within that world, and you think, okay, you're disabled. You've got a regular job like everyone else. You do what every regular person does, except the fact that you live life on a wheelchair. And these kids who were born disabled, I had to. Part of my job was also to spend a little bit of time at the local primary school, because some of the disabled kids, one of them had Down syndrome. The other one, I can't remember, like exactly. But, I just had to spend time with them, helping them with the homework, or just playing with them and things like that. And, I was really enjoying it, and I could see that
Mhm.
these kids were just like any other kids. And, sometimes they were picked at, and I had to, step in and just make that stop. And, and I could see that they were upset, but they had a fight in them, like,
Yeah.
what you're picking me on is wrong, and that had a really big impact on me. So that experience really came back big time when I became disabled at the age of 40.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so it all started flooding back, and I was so grateful, even more so in that moment than I ever was, because who
Wow.
knows? Who knows? Maybe that was meant to be, and that me having that experience really really helped me.
Yeah.
So, Essie,
That's
yeah, no, but I was going to say, I kind of like forgot the point now. You need to remind me, because I
I don't
went
know
back.
either. That was really interesting. That was really insightful, actually. I didn't know any of that. And that's really interesting for two reasons. Because, the idea of military service, mandatory military service on the outside sounds awful, but actually it leads to so many kind of opportunities and
Yeah,
advantages that you've just described.
yeah,
I'm
everyone
not going
hated
to
it.
get political and say the book back, but that's really interesting. We also, on the very first episode of the Equality Edit, we talked to Joe Collette, who is a web developer. And he was talking about why he got into developing specifically for inclusive and accessible websites. And it's because his daughter was born with Down syndrome. And when his daughter's like 3 years old now. And when his daughter was born, the doctors were like, "Oh my gosh, she's not gonna have any quality of life," and everything like that. And it's just making me think about what you're talking about, because you were giving the resources and you were given a very different kind of experience of what disability would be from when you acquired your disability, but also when you worked with disabled people when you're a lot younger. And it's just these outside influences that really impact our perceptions and what we think an experience is going to be. So I'm not quite sure what question I asked you in the first place, but I'm glad that you answered that one, because I think that's really interesting. So thank
Yeah.
you.
And also, like what you just said about, the experience of this other person that you were talking to, it also remind me of, it's not just what you're going through, it's also the perception of disability of people around you. Like when it became evident that I was going to live life as a disabled person, I was I I knew I had no other way. You have to accept it. You have to embrace
Mm,
it, because if not, you're just going to go mad. Like you need to
mm.
have that mindset. And I realized that, there's that intergenerational gap. And so I often found myself having to convince people around me, close people, family people who, like my parents as well, or like people the age of my parents, that, oh no, don't worry, everything is going to be okay, because, but for them it was a bit of a catastrophe, like
Mm.
your son or your loved one, suddenly having to live life as a disabled person. I mean, how, like that's the worst thing that can happen. It's not a great thing to happen to you, but there is a lot worse, so I often had to find myself in a very unfortunate position of having to convince people that everything was going to be
Wow.
fine, like
Yeah.
whereas you want that to be the other way around,
Other way round, really. You
and
need that. Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
So there is that like catastrophizing. I don't know if that's a word, like
Well,
that
I think it is.
thing
Yeah.
and it all comes with the fact that you know nothing about disability, and all the positive things that there is that can happen to you in life with you are disabled.
Did you find that a lot of your relationships changed after you acquired your disability?
Luckily, no, not so much. I still get, some of my uncles or aunties who, they are just so impressed with like how I'm living life. And you go to the gym, wow, I mean, you are so great. And you go shopping yourself, oh my God, yeah, that is amazing. I'm like, if I'm gonna be the, like your motivation to get out of bed every day just because I like I cross the road and go show, knock yourself out. But so, things like that, I still, I know that they're meant in a nice way. They mean nice and they are genuinely happy for me. It's just,
Yeah.
things like that. It's just a generational thing. There's nothing bad about that.
I know I know what you mean. I experienced that and I never know how to respond. So even yesterday, my ironing lady, who I've known for like a couple of years now, said, "Oh, you're so," I think she's, and she did not mean it in a patronizing way at all, but she said, "You are so inspiring that you do so much." And I was here, but I work from home. I don't actually, there are days that I don't leave the house. So, I think you actually do more than I do. But it's this idea that, not that, I just want to, I'm not a hermit. Just want to qualify that. But it's this idea that, we are kind of sitting at home doing nothing, feeling sorry for ourselves. But I do, I agree with you that it's hard to take, even when people mean it with the best intentions. I find it really, really hard to swallow. And I either don't know what to answer, or I really cannot be grateful that somebody thinks that about me. I
Yeah.
find it really difficult.
I think you're right. Yeah, no, I totally understand that. And I recognize also that, there's definitely living in a large city like London, there's more information, there's more representation, there's more positive representation and visibility, for disabled people. Um, but when I go back home to Italy, I
Mm,
can clearly see that it's very different. It's
yeah.
still there are disabled people out and about and living their life and working and just like regular like everyone else. But there is also a lot of people who are just like not able to leave the house, or not able to leave the house because they don't their homes are not adapted enough. Maybe they have a lot of stairs and maybe that sort of thing. It's still working on. And
Mm,
I live in a smaller city as well. Maybe things are different in larger cities like Rome, Milano, whatever. But so for what I see, based on my experience and my observation, to my reality when I go back home, it's still not as available. But you just reminded me once I
I
was
don't
at a family gathering, and I happened to move a chair from one spot to the other, and one of my cousins was like, "My God, you just lifted that chair and you moved it." I mean, and he was so impressed that I did that, and I'm like,
like you're the whole cause of things.
"Are you kidding me?" But yeah, so yeah, that's
Oh,
that. That's really That's really things like that still happen, and I need to remind myself, like, okay, like maybe it could be worse. It could be worse.
Um, I know what you mean though, and I think it is the case in Britain as well. I remember we were at an event together a couple of years ago, and I think an acquaintance of yours was talking about I don't know how disabled people live in these backward villages, and then he said, "Oh, where do you live, Essie?" And I was like, "In one of those backward villages." So there are places, outside of London that, but I don't feel as though I live a letter life from an accessibility standpoint, because I'm not in London.
Yeah,
But there are still places everywhere, probably still in London, where disabled people are stuck
yeah,
in their environment.
yeah,
I mean, there are stories all the time about disabled people who are being refused DFGs, disabled facilities grants, in their houses, so they can't move from their living room to their kitchen without support, or they can't get out because there's no step-free access for them to get out. But I think in this country, it's more to do with attitude than ability to make a change, which is so maddening.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely.
So let's talk about one of the other things we wanted to talk about was your career, kind of the comparison between the career that you had before you acquired your disability and then the career you have now. Because I know you used to be in events management, and when we spoke about kind of what we are going to speak about today, we touched upon that a little bit.
Yeah, so yeah, my professional background is in events management, and I worked in. So I lived in London for many years, like more than 25 years, and most of my professional background happened around like in the hospitality industry. And yeah, for a number of years, up until I've become disabled, up until I had meningitis, and I had to take a very long time off. I was really enjoying working in events management. I mean, it is something that was very exciting, and I can't really say it fulfilled me as a job. It's an experience that I wanted to do, and then I pursued, and then I have done for many years. And I was just it became evident at some point. I was aware that it wasn't a type of industry that that I wanted to be a part of. In a long run. Say and once you are in events management, you can either progress and go into more senior management, and of course the opportunity is there. You have the experience, and you have what you need to be able to make that step. But you need to be very convinced that it's a step that you want to make, because you go into senior management, then of course you need to fulfill that role, and you need to be very good at it, and stuff like that. And I wasn't really 100% sure that that's what I wanted. I don't want to get into a job and more commitment and more responsibilities, and knowing that I'm not 100, not my heart and my mind is not 100% there. And so and of course, like the other alternative is to continue doing what you're doing that the best that you can. But at the same time, like anything, after you do that job for X amount of time, it becomes a little bit same. It becomes a little bit
Mm.
boring and unmotivating, and stuff like that. It's just natural. So I was a little bit stuck in that environment for some time. I was doing it, and I was I was showing up at work every day, and I was and it was okay. But I was very, very aware that it is a kind of job that it's revenue generating is a huge part of that role. So sales and upselling and things like that. And then one thing happened. I had many clients, mostly, corporate clients, coming to do like conference, sometimes, small meetings to like 3-day conferences and things like that. So you come across many, many, many interesting people. And one of the people that I come across was doing a 3-day event for a charity, a large charity. I think it's Blood Cancer UK, but it was called differently back then. And during the planning stage, you get to interact with the client, what they want, what's kind of set up, and all those details. And And I was just so interested about this type of event because it was a charity. It was for a large charity, and they had so many things going on, and I was asking him a lot of questions. I was really interested to know how he got into this kind of role, and he shared that before he got into working for a charity, he was working in banking. He had a big job, earning a lot of money, but he was very unhappy. Because there was a lot of stress. He wasn't enjoying life, because of all of the stress that it gave us, and he decided to give it all up
Mm.
and to try to use his skills that he built in his career working in the city as a banker, and he decided to work for a charity, and since then he started to enjoy life a lot more
Well,
because it had a more meaningful impact on he was aware that what he was doing had an impact, a positive impact on communities, on many things, and he was so much happier, and that really stuck to me. That really really stuck to me, and I thought, gosh, I wish I could just like drop everything and do that. And that experience, that interaction really had a big impact on and it kind of like a penny dropped, and I realized that's something that I wanted to do, and so it didn't happen back then because eventually like when I got ill with meningitis, I didn't really know a lot about
mm.
meningitis when it happened to me. It's such an insidious thing because all you feel, the kind of like, yeah, the feeling is very close to like a cold or flu,
Okay.
so you kind of like feel very tired. You maybe have like a headache. You just want to lie down. And then, in fact, it was the beginning of something a lot bigger. And, eventually I spent many months in the hospital, like I mentioned to you earlier. And when I came back out of this journey and I started to recover and I started to get back into life, I decided that I wanted to work as a volunteer for a charity. So I started to work. I was recruited. Yeah, I was recruited by a charity based in South London called the Latin American Disabled Peoples Project, which isn't too far away from where I lived. And they recruited me as I can't remember, like maybe I was a volunteers manager or something like that. And that was my first experience working for a charity as a volunteer. And it was great because I was living my new life as a disabled person. It was kind of like getting me, it was my first big responsibility, even though I was a part-time volunteer role. I was still responsible about something, and I learned so much thanks to this charity, and the director of the charity. He was, he worked very close. I worked very closely with him, and he taught me a lot. He was great, and I'm still very much in touch with them. And thanks to my journey with them, and I think I volunteered for them, I don't know, 2 or 3 years or something like that. And that is what gave me that, that motivation to co-found an organization like ParaPride. So eventually, when I left it because we decided to set up ParaPride, and that's how it all came
Oh,
about. And of course, because events is also a big part of what ParaPride does, my previous experience in event management and hospitality really
yeah.
helped for that aspect of the work
Yeah.
that we do.
Do you think that you would have ever left event management if you hadn't got meningitis?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that it would have been. I think that it would have been definitely challenging, because you it wouldn't have been impossible, but it requires risk, because
Mm.
things kind of work out and
Yeah.
things may not work out at the end of the day. There are many similarities to jobs that you do in events management to jobs that you can do like for charities, but you have to consider many different aspects, and there is the risk element. And I may have, I think that eventually I would have changed the job, but it probably would have taken a lot longer, and it would have been a very different experience. It would have had a different
Yeah.
impact. So I'm grateful that things turned out the way
Yeah.
they did in terms of being involved in but the charity industry. But yeah, I don't know if I would have. I think it may have taken a little longer and a lot more thinking and considerations, which yeah.
It's interesting that the lived experience, which I know we're going to talk about in a minute. Lived experience helps to shape really the direction of who we are and what we do. And so maybe, and correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, because I think I am. But maybe this is my experience. Maybe without that lived experience, it would have been hard to find something that you were passionate about in kind of the voluntary and charity sector.
I think you said exactly the right thing there. Like with your lived experience, you know what
Mm,
matters to you, and you know what how you can really impact something that you
yeah.
feel passionate about, that you feel like it's a meaningful thing to do. And it's exactly right. Like when I found myself in a position where like I could relate to something because of my own personal experiences, and having identified the need to address the lack of inclusion, for the community, because I felt myself
Mm,
cut out of an experience. And so, you realize this is the right time. This is the right time for me to really contribute to something the way it needs to, the way it
yeah.
deserves to.
Yeah, it's so when I was before I set up Celebrating Disability, and I honestly don't want to sell myself short in my career before Celebrating Disability, but this seems to be the first job, for want of a better word, because I don't find it a job, but the first job that I really feel that there's a consequence to it if I don't. So the reason I found it so easy to leave my old charity was because they were awful, but also because, it didn't seem as though there were that many consequences. I thought, oh, well, I can always just, not that I think it should be something that people rely on in terms of not doing something else, but I can always go on to disability benefits for a while I look for something else. It just so happened that I decided within a month to set up a business. And I was applying for jobs at the time, but I do understand it's not that easy and it's not that simple for other people. And I was in the very lucky situation. People might not think it's lucky for them, but I thought it was lucky for me that I don't have any dependents. I'm not married. I don't even have a goldfish. So there was nobody that was going to suffer if I didn't find a job for a few months. But it's not so in that way we're quite privileged that we have the option to kind of do those kind of things where it's not always available for other people to have that opportunity to take that risk in that same way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that is a lot of people can relate to that, the element of risk that slows you down, that stops you from, taking that step, because you have to think about so many different
Mm.
things. So yeah, no, it is a difficult thing, but things worked out the right way. I'm very
So
glad
the
about that.
moral of that story is don't have any children, stay single and become disabled. And then you can do whatever you want
Yeah,
to do.
exactly. With a bit of luck, you'll be disabled, and then
Yeah,
everything
yeah,
will
yeah.
happen
Come
for
and
you.
join us. It's great. So let's talk about lived experience, because I think in both of our businesses, and sorry, Celebrating Disability being a business, ParaPride being a community-led charity, in both of our organizations, we lead by and we value lived experience and that user-led way of working. So tell me how it impacts your work positively or negatively if you want to.
My lived experience, how it impacts
Yeah.
my work. Well, of course, like I said, being a disabled person, you realize how important it is to have that representation. Like you have a responsibility to ensure that the narrative of the disabled community is the right one, and it comes from disabled people. And it's not told by people who don't
Mm.
identify, within the disabled community, because we are the negative narrative or the misrepresentation of disabled people in society, like it's still wrong, like it still portrays us in a negative way. And those ideas are so deeply rooted in our society, they becomes really difficult to shake them off, so it's really important that the narrative is told by disabled people, and that it's led by disabled people. And so, I think that lived experiences are really important, and that is not only for the disabled community. That can be for
Mhm.
different communities. For for Black people, or for trans people, or for like any kind of like marginalized group. He have to take ownership of the narrative that is being said. And so I always found that incredibly important, for that. We ParaPride has launched, we do different activities from events, workshops, and panel discussions and talks. And we also recently launched Intersectionality Awareness Week, which is an awareness campaign, because we recognize how important it is to talk about, like we are here, ParaPride's main intersection are disability and LGBTQ plus, but on top of that, we have other intersecting identities that are part of our lives, and so we wanted to create a campaign that could that where we could really talk about being what it's like to be disabled, to be LGBTQ plus, but also I'm on top of that, I'm a person of color, I'm a I have different intersectionalities, and so those things added, overlaid intersectionalities. I want those are things that I want to be proud of, that I want to embrace. But at the same time, I recognize that I can also it impacts my life, and I can be discriminated on multiple levels because of those layered intersectionalities. And so yeah, we launched Intersectionality Awareness Week, and so we feel very passionate about that because we can tell our lived experiences not just from the disability point of view, but from other points of view. Throughout the week, we Intersectionality Awareness Week, by the way, is from in May, from the 11th to the 17th of May, and throughout the week, we have different events that are panel discussions and partnering with different organizations and different people that we have one event that is going to be about trans and disability, another one about LGBTQ plus aging people. So it's great to hear about the different experiences of intersectionality and the lived experiences of each speaker. So yeah, and of course, it comes from it. Intersectionality is associated with how people experience overlapping forms of discrimination or disadvantage, based on their attributes, and how those attributes relate to the systems of oppression in society. So, like I said, you can be a disabled person facing different barriers because, of course, society isn't always built to accommodate the needs of disabled people. You can be a person of color, and of course, you may encounter discrimination and racism and disadvantages. You can be an LGBTQ plus person coming across homophobia and transphobia or hate crime because of your orientation or sexual or gender identity. And all those multiple discrimination, they can really make life very difficult. But like I said, those identities are making us who we are. We don't pick and choose them, and we want to be able to be proud of them and embrace our differences. At the same time, we want to be treated fairly in society. So that's what intersectionality awareness week is about, like creating a space to share our experiences, our lived experiences, and celebrate diversity and promote understanding and feeling empowered and feeling united as well. So yeah, we're very excited about this, and this is all linked to telling the story from people who have the lived experiences.
And
It's
I
really,
think, you know
really
what?
important.
Intersectionality Week really sums up what I love about ParaPride in a nutshell. So it's not Daniele and a few people within ParaPride saying, we have lived experience, that's enough. We can tell the story ourselves. It's about opening it wide to the community to hear from so many different voices and so many different perspectives. And whilst that's really important to spread the word of how disability and LGBTQ plus is intersectional, it also empowers that community as well at the same time.
And we really wanted to honor, the concept which was developed by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, who is an American rights advocate and scholar of critical race theory. And this the term of intersectionality has been around for so many years because she developed it. This study was done in the
Mm.
late 80s, I think 89 or early 90s, I can't remember. And we are talking about it more and more recently. We are becoming more aware of it. But I personally have always been very aware. Like my sexual orientation, so being a gay person, and also my ethnicity, my ethnic background. These are two identities that have always been part of me, since I was born. Even though I may have not been outspoken of, being a gay person for many years, it's always been within me. Um, but but the disability aspect is something that happened to me later on, and how those things interact, even though they are part of you, is really interesting, and they're not always easy to
Mm.
handle. They're not always easy to live through that. So talking about it and sharing your experiences is really helpful for your journey.
I think it is. And it's, I find that when I'm delivering training as a disabled, mixed race woman, that I talk from my lived experience, from my intersectionalities. And 9 times out of 10, either in the room itself or afterwards, somebody, at least one person, will come up to me and say, thank you for sharing that. Because that's really helped me consider where I sit in the intersectionality as well. And people quite often, especially when we're talking about, well, we are always talking about disability. And when we talk about disability and invisible impairments and how important it is for people with invisible impairments to feel confident to ask for the support they need, people say, I never thought about it from that perspective before. I'm going to ask my manager for some help because I thought that my impairment wasn't as, in quotes, important as somebody else's. And so I think sharing those lived experiences is so valuable to help others feel empowered that they also have the right to have an equal experience as well.
Yeah,
And I think it comes
absolutely.
through as well, with ParaPride's events when you have the
The annual event, yeah, our largest event, yeah, is the annual event. So this year we delivered it
mm,
in March, on the 21st of March, and that was that's always a great experience. It's so good to see how everyone
mm,
enjoys that event. It grows every year. It's an opportunity for us, for our community, for us to provide a safe space for people to come together, feel included, feel visible, and to celebrate our community. Like celebrate disability, no pun intended. And
thank you very
and
much.
so and it's
Yeah.
just so great, to have an opportunity to showcase our talent, like the disability talent as well. So we have many performances. We have a lineup of really great acts, like from comedians to drag artists to burlesque performers to acrobatic performances. You've been part of it pretty much every year, particularly with we also have the panel discussion, and every year we put forward conversation that really needs to be put out there. We have it becomes very interactive because we have the Q&A with the audience, and the speakers have so much richness in terms of, like,
Big.
things to share. Yeah, that's a part of the event that you're
Mhm.
actively involved in as well, because we end up co-hosting it together most of the time. And then we have the other community aspect where we have, like, community partners coming, setting up their stalls and interacting with the attendees, And it just becomes like this day
Yeah.
festival of disability, LGBT, and it becomes a great celebration. And every year we do something different, something more. We listen to the community. We get their feedback, and we say, okay, let's try this differently this year because some people had, like had that experience, and so we, and it's great. It's a lot of work, and but it's very meaningful and it's very important and it's valid. So yeah, we do that
Mm.
once a year, and that is our kind of our main event, and it's often promoted and advertised on our social media channels. So if anyone wants to find out more about it, they can head either over to our website or to our social media, and they can find out more of what we
Cool.
do there.
So yeah, no, it is a great event, and I wasn't blowing my own trumpet. I'm not one of the great performers. I co-host the panel with Daniele. Yeah, no, I'm not sure I'd bring anything to the stage. But what I was going to say with that is, you can really tell from the Q&A section of the panel that the audience is quite inspired by what panelists say. It gives people, kind of that power to feel as though they can share their thoughts and ideas as well. But that leads us really well onto kind of the other really important thing about disability and LGBTQ empowerment, which is advocating and activating for our communities. We've talked at length really about why this is so important. And I know it was a topic of the panel discussion at the event this year. Last month, I had on this podcast Bernie Vincent, who is an activist from the 80s and 70s in London. And she has some great stories to share about, her journey through kind of disability activism and why she thinks it's so important. Um, for me, it's about kind of ensuring the community always has a voice, and we are always kind of living that kind of mantra, nothing about us without us, by constantly reminding people that we are here and that we
Mm-hmm.
should have a say, the first say and the co-productive say in what happens about us and to us all the time. But tell me from your perspective why this is so important.
Well, it kind of like goes back to the narrative, controlling the narrative and making sure that that we are part of decision making processes, and that we know that any change in policy, the change in regulations is going to
Mm.
impact us the right way, and in a way that it will be benefiting our existence and our in different aspects of life. So from access to healthcare, access to work, housing, and all of those things, it's really important that disabled people are part of the decision-making processes to make sure that that change happens for the right reasons and for the right people. And so it goes back to lived experiences, like having to share that. And also, it's important because employment for disabled people isn't easy, but accessibility in the workplace is something that is incredibly important. So having those jobs and making sure that disabled people have employment in the right areas and that are able to contribute in the right areas is very
And
important.
also, I agree with you completely, and kind of really articulating and honing down on the impact of not doing this in the correct way. So if we don't have a voice in these conversations, then people are making assumptions about what we need and how we need it. I've heard a lot of people, not a lot, but a few people say recently in conversations about activism, oh, I think activism is dead, which makes me really angry because I'd say, well, how do you think that any of our groups, marginalized groups, got to where we are today? It is because we fought for it ourselves. The disability movement, the civil rights movement, Black Panther movement, the
Yeah.
suffragettes. We all went through so much oppression and so much kind of, what's the word, danger in order to get where we are today. And I think we need to constantly remember that. And the reasons why we have the legislations that we have today is because people put themselves at risk to get it there for us.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. It's so important to. You're right. What we talked about at that specific event for the annual ParaPride event panel, we specifically talked about the activism and the protesting and protesting safely and making sure that there is always a risk, to protesting and to activism, but it is a necessity. And particularly for disabled people, because being an activist, it's really important to be able to protest and be part of those events. But it's not the only way.
No.
Especially if you think that it's going to impact your safety. And
Yeah.
so, you have to think of different ways where you can really be heard and you can lead on an idea and try to change the narrative and try to, to impact the media about, what the cause that we are at for, that we are protesting for, and making sure that your contribution is still impactful. So yeah, it's really important to be able to share information like that. And particularly in nowadays, like with all what's going on in the world, with the far right movement rising and all of that, we don't want
Yeah.
to be left behind, and we don't want to not be a part of things, of activism, because we are held back from our disability, that we still want to be heard. So it's really important to, to find alternatives and continue our
It
activist
is
work.
it's so true. And I think that, yeah, think kind of the marching is really important, but I think you can be an activist in whatever small way. I mean, this morning I was having a conversation with a prospect client and I explained what we did in celebrating disability, and she said, we're working with more neurodivergence this year. And I said, I know it's a trend at the moment. There's a conversation about how different disability groups are being split out. So you have neurodivergence, which is in somehow different to physical impairment, which is in somehow different to mental health impairment, and so on and so forth. But in actual fact, we're all under the same umbrella of a disability. And so I think you can change people's opinions just by having that conversation. It doesn't have to be a an argument. It doesn't have to be a tense conversation. It's just a conversation. And I think the work that we both do in celebrating disability and ParaPride is activism. I can't complete a training session without getting on a soapbox about something, but not in a way that offends anyone or puts anyone on the spot, but really kind of opening up their thought process about what's happening to us, why we are not having an equitable opportunity in the workplace. It's very easy to think cause and effect. The cause is this person isn't working hard enough. The effect is we can't hire them. But they're not looking beyond that. Why isn't that
Mm,
person perceived to be
yeah.
working hard enough? Is it because they don't have the right adjustments? Why don't they have the right adjustments? Is
Mm,
it because there isn't enough training? Why
mhm,
isn't there enough training? Because resources are being cut to funding for companies. Why are resources being cut to funding for companies? And so on and so forth. So it's about opening up that discussion and
mm,
helping people see beyond the blinkered vision view. And I think for me, that's what activism is about. I think the Equality Edit podcast is activism. I think the events that ParaPride holds and the panel discussions are activism. I think that when you go out and deliver talks, that's activism as well. It doesn't always have to look the same.
yeah. And I think that what you're doing with the equality edit is really good, because it creates that space to be able to share those, those really important, um things, and you're absolutely right. It is a great way of being an activist, and just by asking questions and making people reflect on why it's
Mm.
important to make the changes, whether it's in the workplace or in your community
Yeah.
or any aspect of life.
Absolutely. Brilliant. So we're going to go on to the last section of this episode where we talk about kind of what, after this, our main conversation, EDI professionals can take from this and take back into their workplace. So our audience are predominantly leaders in the equality, diversity and inclusion space. They could also be in learning and development. They could also be in HR. And then we have another section of listeners who are disabled people themselves, listening to empower themselves and to get some information about what to do next. So what advice would you give leaders creating inclusive workplaces to begin with?
Well, I'd say employing disabled people is very important. And I have the feeling that a lot of the times, there is resistance to employing disabled people because our workplace isn't accessible enough for this, that, the other, and so there is no point on waiting around until you feel that your workplace is accessible enough. You can still employ disabled people, and you will be on a journey. You will be on a journey, and you will be able to listen to your employees, and in the same way you listen to any other employee, and the same way you want anyone else to feel comfortable enough to be able to do the job that they're supposed to be doing. Like I think that when it comes to recruiting disabled people, there's always a bit of a resistance, for things like that, because there isn't enough knowledge. Like, disability is such a broad term. There are so many different types of disability. Some are visible, as we know, some are non-visible, some are, some disabilities are more complex than others. And, I think that, there is a bit of stress on, like, not understanding disability enough. I think that it's okay, to get things wrong, like, as long as the end goal is to ensure that that you will impact things differently, that you will make the right change, like, by listening your employees, and getting the right feedback, and and hearing from their personal lived experiences on and getting the help from them directly. I think that it's really important. So I think that employing disabled people is very important, is very crucial for any workplace moving forwards.
I think that's a really strong message, and that idea of kind of you can't learn how to do it if you don't start, because you learn as you're going. I think that's really powerful. So yeah, and it is. I agree with you as well that it's not about knowing all the answers. It's about taking the risk, taking the jump, and working together in collaboration. Would you have any advice for disabled people listening?
I mean, like, that's it's not like a tough question, but, like, the type of advice that I would give to disabled
Mm.
people is continue, like, believing in yourself. You can do whatever life. I know that things can be very difficult. Living in society that isn't built to accommodate our needs is really hard, and it's very unmotivating, and it's very, like, I think that disabled people are very resilient, incredibly strong. And I think that it's important not to allow anything in life to change that, to make you think that you're not valued, that you're not strong, and that you're not loved, and that you're not, I think that it's really easy to be influenced by all of these forces and energies, that are trying to make you feel that you're not worthy of, like, being a part of something, being included. I think that my advice is just to ignore anything like that. If you have any of these feelings in life, just continue to believe in yourself, and continue to do whatever it is that you're doing. And things take time. Things change comes with time and with a lot of patience. And like, I just find I have days where I really feel hopeless, like, and I just kind of, like, think to myself, just allow today to go, and then tomorrow is a brand new day, and things, and often enough, the following day, I feel a lot stronger, a lot better to face those difficulties that previous days or previous times, I feel, I felt that they were difficult and just impossible. I think, like that's really my only true advice that I'd give to any other disabled person, particularly people who have acquired disability, who find themselves in life with having to make a lot of change and having to adapt to things completely, differently to what they are used to. That's really all I can say. I was at the gym the other day, and there's another amputee, and every time we run into each other, there's always like, we get really excited about comparing
Yeah,
notes
it
and
really
like
is.
sharing up. It's so true. It's just like you meet another disabled person, and you kind of like feel a bit like, a long lost family member that you need to
No,
catch up.
I know what you
That
mean, though, I
it's
feel
not
like that as well.
not the case for everyone, but it really helps you understand that you're not alone, that other people are having similar experiences. And, like Essie, when you and I get together and we kind of like talk about stuff like
Mm,
that, there is an element of comedy that comes to it because you kind of like have to laugh at things sometimes. It's just becomes so ridiculous, whether it's other people's perception about disability or like weird comments that they make or things that they say. And it can drag you down sometimes. It can really drain you. So we really need to learn how to, yeah, just
agreed.
push that out and continue to believe in ourselves. Really, that is the only advice
Well,
I
for
I,
someone that
I
said
can
they don't
give.
have a lot of advice for disabled people, I think that advice is really perfect, actually. So brilliant, which leads me on to the next one. Thank you so much. I genuinely think that that was really helpful advice. What would, if you were, think of Daniele back when he was about to go and work in that charity for disabled children, what would Daniele of today tell Daniele now? Oh, sorry. What would Daniele of today tell Daniele
What
of
would
when he was 18?
when I back then, I would definitely say do it. Do it. That's going to be a big step that is going to that is going to impact your life, and I think that Daniela back then just thought, okay, this is a year, this is 12 months, I'm doing this, and I'm gonna enjoy the journey, and I'm gonna complete what I'm supposed to be doing mandatory. And I think back then would think, okay, now this is done. I just leave it back there and move on and do something else, either continue my studies or, like, or move to London, things like that. So I think that, like, back then I didn't know the impact that experience would have had in my life. Move it fast forward to when I become disabled. So I think what the advice that I'd give to myself back then is like, like listen to yourself and do it. I even had some, yeah, I remember like my mum, like who's incredibly supportive and incredibly proud of everything I do. Like back then when I was 18 and I broke the news and I said, look, I've been allocated to this charity, and it's charity to support disabled people. And she was like, oh my God, that's going to be so tough because like, the realities that you're going to come across, they're probably going to impact your mood. They're going to make you feel depressed. And,
Yeah.
and, because we didn't have any
Yeah.
knowledge of disability, and particularly an older person, for her it's like, oh my God, that you're going to be dragged down into this. And even I was like, come on, mom, I think I'll
Not
be
going to,
okay. Don't worry. It's much better than having to, go and shoot at things, for and and so I think that I definitely tell myself, listen to your gut because you will, you will make the right choice.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Do you have any influences that you can share with us?
So, I was thinking about that, and I'd love to say, like to give you like some really good names of people who, but I think my main influences is, music. Like I listen to
Love.
music, and I get really influenced by that, and I listen to a lot of like people who really contributed to music history, not just to the music history, but also to,
Mhm.
actual history, looking back, and listening to old soul and jazz, and, people
Yeah.
like Marlena Shaw, uh, who, who was really singing about,
I love.
civil rights movements, and, back in the
Yeah.
60s and 70s. And I'm really inspired by people like that, by that type of music. I listen to like Little Richard. Like I watched this amazing documentary about
Mm.
Little Richard, and how his whole career he's been overlooked, but like he was the architect
Mm.
of rock and roll, and people still believe that it was like Elvis Presley. But people like that, created so much change. It's so powerful, and he was a black person. He was, he was a gay man. He was positive. He was out, and then he was positive, and he was out, and then he was so like outrageous and
Oh, yeah.
so great. And he also identified as
Mm.
disabled because he had this disability that impacted his mobility, his walking specifically. None of that ever stopped him. None of him. He was a force, and he was just so, like I really am impacted and influenced by people like that, particularly, like black artists, and the
Mm.
yeah, the impact and the contribution that they gave to music, and to, you know change in civil rights movements and things like that. That's the main thing. And then of course after that there are more current people, in life, but in today's world, more recent, that are very impactful. But when I think about influence, I immediately, it brings me back to music, and that.
I love that. I really love that actually. Did you see the David Bowie exhibit at the V&A?
I didn't, but I know that you did. And
Yeah,
and and
it
and
was incredible. It was
yeah.
absolutely incredible. And what I didn't realize was how much, talking about, how original artists impacts today's music, how he impacts so much of the music through the decades. In all genres was it was absolutely incredible. So where can people find out more about you and ParaPride?
Well, we are present on all social media channels. We are on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, we are on Facebook, we are on YouTube as well. And of course, we have a website. We are in the process of updating our website, but we do have, it is live, and you can find out more information about what we do and our future projects and so on those channels. We also have an Intersectionality Awareness Week social media pages as well. We're on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, and we also have an IAW website as well, which has been newly developed. So
Brilliant.
yeah, we are present on all of these channels. And I'm not sure when this will be made available to your audiences, but just as a reminder, Intersectionality Awareness Week this year is the second week of May, so between the 11th and 17th. It doesn't really matter because we are in the process of pre-recording all of the content and all of the panels, and so those will be made available on our YouTube channel. So you know, yeah, you can head over to our social media. You can find out more, and you can listen and see the events that we do there.
Awesome. My mathematical brain is non-existent anyway, so I can't calculate quick enough whether this episode will be out before, during, or just after, but it will be soonish after without me calculating. It'll definitely be in May 2026. But we will put all those links in the show notes, the links to the Intersectionality Awareness Week website, all the events, the ParaPride website, all the social media things as well. So I just want to say thank you so much, Daniele. I've so enjoyed this conversation. I've been looking forward to it. So
you.
thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. And thank you very much, everyone, again, for tuning in to another episode of the Equality Edit. As I always like to say, don't forget to like and subscribe. Even if you're on Spotify, you can still do the same. And if you have any ideas of topics you would like us to discuss, let us know either in the comments or send us an email or something, because that can give us inspiration for what we can talk about in the future. But thank you very much and look forward to seeing you for another episode. Bye. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the notification button so you don't miss anything. If you're watching on Spotify, give us a 5-star rating.